Hi everyone. On my channel you find quite a lot of material on Angular 2, which I, by the way, will also update in the future once Angular 2 is stable and out and so on, and on Node.js. Now you might know that Angular 1 and Node.js was a quite popular combination. And the same is true for Angular 2 and Node.js. It works together very well. And I thought, why not make a video where I show the basics of how to connect Angular 2 with Node.js and give you the tools to create applications based on that. Now, little self-advertisement right at the beginning, but also might be very helpful to you. If you want to dive really deep into that, you might want to check out my Angular 2 and Node.js course over on Udemy, and you'll find a link in the description, and also, if available, some discounts to get it cheaper than the default price. As you can see, it's pretty well rated, and in this course you will learn how to build an Angular 2 plus Node.js application, how to implement authentication, how to create data on the server, store it, fetch it, manipulate it, delete it, how to manage the state in your Angular 2 application, and also how to handle errors. In the end, you'll even learn how to deploy it to Heroku or AWS. So really a big package. And obviously, I can't really do that here in one single video or in this series, since this requires a lot of work and is really in depth. But what I can do and what I want to do is, well, show you the basics. How do you connect both ends and how do you get them to interact? So therefore, I'm in a brand new workspace, and now that's not helpful to you because you don't have this project, right? Do you? Well, you can get it on my GitHub account, and you'll find a link to this in the description too. There I have a repository Angular 2 Node.js where you can switch to the branch seed project and then just clone it or download it as a zip file and extract it. And this is exactly the project I have currently opened. Now, what is this project? Well, I'm not going to go super deep through all the files and folders, but to give you an overview, the assets folder here will basically hold my Angular 2 application in its TypeScript form, so uncompiled. So here in the app folder, this is where I will write my code. Then in the bin folder, that's on the back end, that will be my Node.js server running. And I created all the Node.js Express, I'm using Express, backend using Express Generator. So if you watched my Node.js Basics series, you saw how this works, and this overall structure might not be too unfamiliar to you. So this was basically created with Express Generator. This is the server generated by it. Then I have my routes folder with the app.js file holding my, well, routes, currently only one, rendering my index view. And then this is the view in the index, in the views folder. And then I have my app.js file, which is basically my, well, application, the application running, or the main file on my backend handling all the requests. So my server in the www file basically loads this app file, sends all requests into this app file in this application, and here Node and Express handles it, applies a couple of middlewares, and so on. One important middleware is this one here, which is required if you're, unlike in this project, hosting your backend on a different server than your frontend. Now here in this project, both will be sent from the same server, so this middleware here would not be necessary, but this basically allows you to do this if you're having two different servers. What do I mean with both coming from the same server? Angular 2 runs in the browser, right? Yes, it runs in the browser, but it has to be served from some server in the beginning, right? It's a single page application, but this single page is needed too. And this single page we get is this index.hbs file. This is just normal HTML code, and here my app gets loaded. And you saw in my Angular 2 videos how that works. And I'm using system.js to, well, start my app and load all the dependencies. In my public folder, in the JavaScript folder, here the compiled Angular 2 files live. So the TypeScript code in the assets folder, in the app folder here, will get compiled into the JavaScript app folder, which is then loaded once my application runs. And the vendor folder here, that's a folder automatically generated by Gulp, which is configured in the Gulp file, which basically copies all the Angular 2 specific dependencies from my Node modules folder into this vendor folder, so that I have access to that on my front end as well, because of course I need them on my front end in my client and not on the server where this Node modules folder would lie. So that's the quick overview over this folder structure. And with that, I'd say, why don't we get started right away? Let's see what we're currently got. So I will start my app, npm start will run my server. And I also need to compile my application. For this, I run npm run gulp. These are all scripts set up in the package.json file, which you might check out here. So with that, I got gulp running, which will keep running and watch my files and recompile them whenever needed. And I got my server running. So with that, let's reload here. We see hello world test. That's the basic application with which we start here based on the seed project. Let me close those tabs. And I'll build on that. And what I want to build is a tiny little application where you're able to create random messages and basically see them in a list here. Doesn't sound too amazing, but actually does a lot. Shows you how to connect backend and frontend. And enough of the talking, let's start. So back in my workspace in WebStorm here, which is the IDE I'm using, I'll start working on my frontend first so that we have something to see, right? So in this app template file, I of course don't want to display hello world. Instead, notice I'm also importing Bootstrap, so some styling in the index file. Instead, I want to create the classes or the HTML code for the list of messages I want to display. So for this, I'll use a container element. This is just a Bootstrap class, of course, with a row inside of it, and then just a column to give this some nice basic styling here. So that's all Bootstrap classes here. And then what I want to have here is I want to have a button which allows me to create a new random message, like this new random message. And of course, this button should receive some Bootstrap classes as well. So I'll give this the classes button and button primary. Next, I'm going to copy all of that code and duplicate it, because in here I will use the general skeleton with the Bootstrap classes. But then I want to create an article element, which I'll give the Bootstrap classes panel and panel default, just to give this some nice look too. And you'll later on see how this looks, of course. And then here I will create a div with a panel body. So this will just be my messages. And here I want to output my message content. Of course, here I'm referring to a variable I haven't created yet, or a property in my component. But I'll come back to that soon. Also, of course, in my article, I want to have multiple articles, multiple messages. So for this, I'll create a ng-for loop here, and I'll loop through all my messages. So with let message of messages. And again, messages doesn't exist yet. Now message in here at least does exist. It's this message I'm creating here with the ng-for loop. But messages would refer to a property in my component class body, and that doesn't exist yet. So there's something I need to do there. Also on my button up here, I want to add a click event, and I want to execute the onAdd message method whenever someone clicks this button. So that's my HTML code. And actually, we can have a look at this. If I reload my page, you see, okay, this is my button. Right now, nothing will happen. I would indeed get an error if you open up the console if I click this. But yeah, that's my application right now. Not too amazing, but we'll get there. I should probably start by adding this messages property. So I'll do this in my app component. I want to create a messages property, but which type should it have? Well, probably my own type. I think it makes sense to create my own message class, which I can use. So I'll do that then. I'll create a new file in my app folder which I will name message.model.ts. And that's just a naming convention that I describe what will live inside this file. And here I'm just setting up a basic model for the data I'll be using throughout my app. In here, all I want to do is I want to export a class, which I will name message. And this class will have a constructor. And here I'm using a shortcut in TypeScript. I'm both setting up my constructor with the arguments it needs, as well as the properties of this class here in one step. By adding the public keyword in front of the name of this argument here, I'm automatically also creating a class property named content in this case. So I will have access to this property later on. And this should be of type string. And that's really all, so not a really complicated model by any means. But it will be the model I'll use throughout this video. And with that, I can make my messages here an array of messages, like so. And I want to make it an empty array at the beginning. Now, of course, I need to import my message. And I'm doing this here at the top by importing message from /message.model without the file extension. That's important when using imports in TypeScript here. We don't specify the file extension. Now with that, we're almost able to see something in our HTML page or on our real application running here. So let's work on that. For now, I'll simply create a dummy message here where I would just write hello as the content. And with that, if I reload my page, you see this message. Now that doesn't look too nice. Maybe it doesn't hurt to enter a horizontal line here between the button and the messages. Yeah, looks much better. And later on, we'll be able to add random messages by clicking this button, and they should appear here. And of course, they should not only appear here, they should also be stored on the server and fetched from the server. That's a part we haven't touched on yet, but I'll come to that, no worries. Before I actually start adding my server-side code, I'll first implement that semicolon shouldn't be there. I'll first implement my onAddMessage method. That's the method I'm calling with this click handler here, onAddMessage. So here in this onAddMessage method, I want to generate a random number between 1 and 100, and I can do this by using the mathRandom method. But this gives me a number between 0 and 1 and a floating point number 2, and 1 would be excluded. So a lot of things I don't want. So the first step is to multiply it with 100. So now at least I'm getting numbers between 1 and 99.99999. Almost there. But I still only want non-floating point numbers, so integers. For that, I'll use the mathFloor function, which will basically always round down the number. So it would give me 0 to 99. And then I just add +1 to get numbers from 1 to 100. And of course, an even quicker way to write this would be to use mathSeal here, which will just round it up. So then I get 1 to 100 as a number. So that's a random number, but not a random message yet. So next I will create a message. And let's say the message should be message, a new message of course, and then my random number plus, and then some string, let's say, is an awesome number. So the random message will really be more like a random number, and then appending this string to it. But I think you get my point. Of course, you can generate whatever you want to generate here, or even create an array with predefined random messages and then pick one from that array, whatever you like. So this is my message. And next I want to push my message onto my message array here. So if I now save this and then I reload my page and now I click random message, well, you see I'm adding my random messages here. That looks pretty good to me. So the front end part is working and we're almost done if we wouldn't miss the complete back end part. Now, if you look at the top, this video is named something like Angular and NodeJS. The Node.js part is really not included unless, well, the loading of the page here. So time to actually work on that and store our messages on the server and get it from there. I'll start by getting rid of the dummy message here first before I get that. But then it's time to continue. And I'll first implement the method to actually add messages, because that of course allows us to see them in a second step then. Now for interaction with the server, I'll first create a service here on the front end in Angular 2, and I'll name it message.service.ts. So that's the file name, and the service itself should be named message service, of course exported. And we need the injectable decorator here. We need that because I will later on inject Angular 2's HTTP service, and you can only inject services into services if the services into which you want to inject does have this injectable annotation. Otherwise, this will not work. If you try to inject a service into a service which doesn't have the injectable metadata, it won't work. So therefore, I'm importing injectable here. Wonderful, so now that's working. I will start by adding a new method which I'll call saveMessage. And I expect to get a message of type message, so my own custom message, which also needs to be imported from the message.model file therefore. And I expect to get this in the saveMessage method. And there I want to reach out to my server and give this message to the server so that on the server I can actually store it in my Mongo database. So with that, time to go back and work on the server. Now, as just mentioned, I'll use MongoDB as a database, and therefore I expect you to have it installed and running on your machine. If you don't, and you don't know how to get there, in the description of the video you'll find a link to a video where I show how to set up MongoDB so that you're up and running and able to follow along. With that, the first step is to install Mongoose. So I'll open up a new terminal window, and that's just a normal terminal navigated into my project here, by the way. And I will install Mongoose, which is just a third-party package making data interaction between Express and MongoDB really easy and allow us to work with data in a very intuitive way. And you'll also find a link to its documentation and a video on Mongoose in my channel in the description too. So with that, I got Mongoose installed, and then the first step is in my app.js file. So in the file which will first get my request on the server, we're on the server now, Angular 2 is done for now, I will import Mongoose by creating a new variable and requiring Mongoose here. And as a side note, because I forgot it, you might want to install it with the save flag to also add an entry in the package.json file, which is important for actually deploying the app, for example. So with that, Mongoose is installed. It was before, and now we're importing it here in the app.js file. And next, I want to connect to my database. So I can use the Mongoose Connect method for that. In here, I have to specify the path to my database. Now, since I'm running this on my local server, it's localhost. And then the question is, which port does it run on? Well, let's have a look. This is the terminal window where my MongoDB server is running. And after starting it up, you will see something like this here, this port specification, which tells you which port is occupied by your MongoDB server. In my case, and this is the default, it's 27,017. So I'll enter this here, 27017, and then you add a slash and the name of the database you want to use. Now you don't have to create this database before using it. It will be created for you. So pick whatever name seems appropriate to you. I'll use Node Angular 2 here. So that will be the database I use for a project here. But you, again, choose whatever you want to choose. Now we're connected to Mongoose, we're ready to use it. And Mongoose, and I'm not going to go deep into Mongoose here because I really got a video on that, but Mongoose uses models. So to work with data, you set up a model on your backend and you work with that model to create data, to store it, to interact with it. And behind the scenes, Mongoose will map this model to your database, will create a collection based on that model. And whenever you store a variable based on that model, it will actually store an entry in the database. And you can fetch data from the database through that model too. So this model is really important, and therefore I will create one. I'll create a new folder first on the root level of my project, and I'll name it models. Now it's named models, but here it will only hold one. I'll give this file a name of message.js because it will hold my message model. Now in here, I'll first import Mongoose again. So require Mongoose. And then I'll need the schema. That's a property Mongoose offers me. Oops, I want to add an E at the end though. And here I just access the schema property. That's needed to create a schema, which again is something in Mongoose you need in order to create a model. So a model in Mongoose is based on a schema, which is like a blueprint for the model, so that Mongoose knows how its model should look like. Next, I will create this blueprint, this schema, with the new operator. And I pass a JavaScript object to the constructor here, where I define how this schema should look like for this message model I'm setting up here. Now, I want my messages only to have a content, so I'll give this a key name of content. It's totally up to you. Choose whatever you want to choose. And then I configure it by passing a JavaScript object as a value. And here I'll set the type, which should be string, uppercase string, that's introduced by Mongoose here. And I also want to make it required, which means you have to set this. So that's the schema, not the model. However, we do work with the model. Therefore, I'll do that next. I'll set up my model. I want to export that model. Therefore, I'll do this with module exports and set this equal to Mongoose model. And now to this function here, I pass the name of the model. And this is important. The convention is to use an uppercase leading character and then, well, whatever name you like, message in my case. And Mongoose will automatically create a collection in the Mongo database based on that model name. And it will always take the lowercase version of that and pluralize it. So message would become messages. It will automatically create a collection messages for you. And then as a second parameter, I pass the schema on which I want to base this model. So now I get this message model available to work with throughout my application, which is of course great because that is what I need. With that, time to switch to my routes file. And in here, I currently only got the route to serve my index file, my index page. But since we're working on creating messages, I'll also add a post route /message, for example. And here I'll take my default express middleware function to handle this request. And here I then want to create this message and store it in the database. So for this, I'll just create a new variable, which should be new message. Now here I want to use the message model I just created. So therefore I have to import this message from my models folder, which is on a higher level. Therefore I go up one folder, then the models folder, and then the message file without file extension on the backend here too. You don't specify the file extension. So now I'm able to create this new message, and this constructor also takes a JavaScript object. Now here, of course, I'm not defining how it should look like. I did this in a schema, but here I pass the actual data. So I know that my model expects to have a content. So therefore I provide a content here. And what should be the value of the content? Well, I expect to get this value with the request. So here I will access my body, since it is a post request, and fetch the content from it. And I expect to have this field available. Since we're the one sending the request, I can make sure that the content field will be available. Next, I will save my message by calling the save function. And I could leave like that, but I want to provide a callback to handle any possible errors. This callback takes two arguments, error and result, and name them whatever you want. But the important thing is you have two arguments you get back. And then you either get an error, or if this is null, you'll probably have a result of this operation. Now here I want to handle the case that we do get an error. And in this case, I want to return a response where the status code is 500 or 404 or whatever you want to set. And then I'll add a JSON object where I basically want to say message error while saving data. And of course, you may pass the error object here or whatever you like. So that's really up to you. Get some generic error handling here. And again, if you want to see a more elaborate error handling, in the Udemy course I showed earlier, I actually do this, and I will display a modal to the user to show any possible errors that happened. So that's the error case, and in case we were successful, I just want to send 201 status code for everything okay, a resource was created, and then I'll also append a JSON object where I send, let's say, a message with the text saved data successfully, something like that. So that's my post route to create a message. Now, of course, we have to wire that up to our front end. So that's the next step. So back to the message service. Here, we're currently not doing anything. So time to change this. I will need to reach out to the web. So I'll definitely need a constructor where I want to inject the Angular 2 HTTP service. And dependency injection of course works like that. Now I need to inject this from the HTTP module, which can be found in the HTTP package at Angular/HTTP. Now in order to be able to use it though, I also need to make a change in my boot.ts file. Here I need to set up the HTTP providers in my bootstrap methods. So I'm doing this by adding HTTP providers. And also I need to import those from the Angular 2 or at Angular HTTP package here. So HTTP providers. So with that I can use HTTP, but still I'm not doing that much in my message service here, right? So in order to change this, I need to first set up the data I want to pass with the request. Because remember, on the backend in my routes file here, I try to extract this content field from the body sent with the request. So I kind of somehow need to send the content. Now on the front end though, if I create a new message like I do here in the app component, remember each new message based on my model here does have a content field. So somehow I just need to turn my message object into a string I can send to my server and able to parse the data there. Well, nothing easier than that. In my message service, I can create a new body constant here. I'll use the built-in JSON stringify method to then stringify the message I pass to this save message method here. With that, I'm doing what I just described. I take my message object and I turn it into a JSON string which has this content field my server will look for. So we're almost there, but I also need to set up some headers here. So new headers, that's another built-in object in Angular 2. So I'll import that too from at Angular HTTP. And it expects a JavaScript object in its constructor, or nothing at all if you don't want to set up any headers. But here I want to set up the content type to tell my server which content it will receive, application JSON. With that I set up the body and the headers, so I'd say I'm finished or I'm prepared to send the request. Now, as in my other Angular 2 videos related to HTTP, I will use observables here. Therefore, and check out those videos if you want to learn more about that. Therefore, I will here return this HTTP and then a post method. So on the HTTP service offered by Angular 2, there is this post method, and I'm executing that. And this, of course, as you probably are aware, will give me an observable to which I can subscribe. And unless I subscribe, no request will be sent. So here I'm just configuring the request, therefore. And this post method expects at least two arguments. The first one is the URL. And this will be HTTP localhost, since I'm running this node server on my localhost. 3000 is the default port, set up in the bin www file. And then the /message route. That's the route we just created, this one here. Now with this URL being set up, I next need to pass the data I want to send. And that's of course body. So I want to send my body here. I also want to send some headers. So I'll pass a JavaScript object as the third argument. And here I specify the headers key, which is of course a kind of built-in key Angular 2 will look for. And then I pass the headers, well, constant I created up here to set the right headers for this request. With that, I'm actually posting the data. And we can try this out. If I restart my server by quitting and running npm start again, and I reload my page, well, I can click here and we see them here. But of course, we don't see if they are actually added on the server. And they wouldn't be, because we're not subscribing to this, remember? We're only setting this up, but this is an observable. We have to subscribe to actually send the request. So in order to do this, I will go to my app component, and then here in the onAddMessage method, after pushing it on my local messages array, I will reach out to my message service. But I can't access it here right now. Well, I need to inject it, of course. So I'll add a constructor and set up my private message services property or message service property. And then message service, the service I just created. Also add the import to /message.service without the file extension. Now, in order to make it work and consult my videos or other tutorials on dependency injection in Angular 2, I also need to add the Providers Metadata. Here, I'm telling Angular 2, hey, this component will need this message service. Can you take care about finding out how to create it? And then Angular 2 knows, okay, I need to be able to create this service. And once it encounters this line here, it is able to create it and give it to me. And therefore, I got this message service available here. And I can now call the saveMessage method and pass this message I create right here. Now still, nothing would happen because I haven't subscribed to it yet. So let's do this next. I'll call subscribe on it. And just to make it clear, we can also specify that we will return an observable here, just to make this 100% clear. You don't have to do this. It's just a good practice to, well, be explicit with the types you're returning. Of course, in this case, I also need to import observables from, in this case, RxJS observable. And then, yeah, I need the observable here. So as I just said, this is an optional step. I'm just being explicit here. So back in the app component, I'm subscribing to it. And now in the success case, so in the case we're successful, well, here all I want to do is I simply want to log out success to see that it seemed to work on the server. In the error case, I will instead, well, log this error to the console. And with that, if I now reload this page again, and I open up my developer tools to see my console, let's see what happens if I click new random message. I see success, so it looks like it works. And we can even verify this. If you go back to the terminal and you open up a new one, keep the server running, navigate into your MongoDB folder, and in there, go into your bin folder where you started your server and run your Mongo database. Now use your database you set up in your app.js file, node Angular 2 in my case. That's the database that was created for you. So node Angular 2 in my case here. And then you might access the messages collection. Remember I said Mongoose would create this collection automatically based on your model name, and execute the find method. And indeed, you see that we have 3 messages in there with 92, 100, and 31, which are exactly the numbers you see here. So that's great. Storing the data on the server actually works. Now, of course, the problem is if we reload the page here, everything is gone. So even though it's stored on the server, we're currently not fetching it. So let's finish this app by actually adding this functionality as well. A good point to start implementing this, of course, is on the back end. So I'll go to my app.js file, and above the post route where I actually create a new message, I'll add another get route to /messages, plural, because I'm fetching multiple messages here, at least potentially. And of course here I'll have my default express middleware function. And then here you will see through Mongoose, it's really easy to fetch data. I can use my model like a class with static methods here. So this model I'm importing here at the top. And then I can use the find method. And find allows me to specify some conditions or criteria by which I want to find it. Now here I want to find all messages, so I don't need to specify anything. I can directly pass the callback function I want to execute once I got data. This callback function also takes two arguments. The first one is a potential error, and the second one, you can name it whatever you like, that goes for both arguments of course, is or will be the messages I retrieved. So here I will first check if we got an error, and in case we did, I will actually just copy this error handling from the post route. So here I will just say error while fetching data. Some generic error handling or very simple error handling here. But if we're successful, I want to set my status to 200, and I want to send back a JSON object. And now this is of course important. Here I want to set a data field which actually holds the messages I got from my database. And you can name this field whatever you like. You can name it messages, whatever you want. I just named data to have a clear distinction to messages here and message here and so on. So now I'm returning the messages that I fetched in the database if I haven't got an error, in which case I would return this response. And the return keyword here is important, by the way. If I would not have it, I would generate my response, but then continue execution and generate another response, which is not what I want. So therefore have return here, but you don't need it here since no code is executed after this line. So with this, I'm actually sending back the objects I got from the server or from the database. And now I need to handle them in my front end. So I'll go to my message service again. And here I'll create a new method which I'll call get messages. And this will also give me an observable wrapping any object. The same is true down here. And that's all, as I said, optional. So what I want to return here is using the Angular 2 HTTP service, executing the get method, an observable configured through this. Now that method, the get method, only expects one argument. It's of course the URL to the resource I want to get. So here localhost 3000 and then /messages is the route we set up here in the app.js file, this one. Now that's fine. And what would this give me? Well, actually it would give me some JSON, the one I'm returning here, but messages here will not be an array in the form I want to use it in my front end. It will be the data I get back from the database, and it will of course also include the content of the messages, but also the IDs of the database entry and so on. So a lot of stuff I don't need, and therefore I need to transform the data I get back. The cool thing about observables is they have a lot of operators we can use. And one cool operator is the map operator, which allows me to transform values. In order to be able to use this, I need to add an import here, which is just rxjs/rx. And that simply unlocks all those observable operators to be used. Now it's red because my IDE has some problems finding that, but it is available. And with the map operator, I can basically take the data I get back from this observable, do something with it, and return a new observable with that transformed data. So put in easier words, it allows me to transform the data I get back from this request. So therefore, I'll use a fat arrow function here to work with that and to work with the data I get, and to specify the logic by which I want to transfer it. So, or transform, not transfer. So I want to create a constant here, and I'll just name this extracted, name it whatever you like. And here I will use the data and run the JSON method on it. I can do this because this data here behind the scenes is of type response, which is a JavaScript interface basically. I can import from the HTTP package, which has a JSON method available, which just means this response, of course, also has the status code and so on. I don't need that. Just give me the body of the response, the data of the response. And that not only give me the data, also immediately transform it into a JavaScript object. So that's a huge important first step. Only with that single line, we're leaving out all the stuff we don't need, status code and so on. We're just getting the data as a JavaScript object. But still, this data also has some stuff we don't need, like database IDs and so on. So in order to fix this, I'll next create a helper array. I'll name it message array, and this should just be an empty array at the beginning, an empty array of messages, of course. And then I'll create a message here, this variable. And next I want to loop through all my elements in my extracted data, but here in the data field. Now what is this data field? Well, if you remember our routes here, data is the name I specified here, data. And if you renamed this to messages, or if you renamed this to anything else, then you also have to rename it here. But in my case, it's called data. And now I'm looping through all the entries in this data. So through all the messages with all the stuff they got attached I don't need. And all I do here is then I will take my message variable I created up here and assign it to a new message in each iteration, where I only extract the content. So each element here in this data field also has an ID and so on, and I only extract the content. Now it's red here because it doesn't know that content will be available, but I know. And then I want to push it onto my message array. And in the end, I will of course return this message array. Because remember, map simply transforms the data. Here I'm setting up the logic by which I want to transform it, and in the end, of course, I have to return the transformed data, otherwise nothing is available. So that's the getMessages function. Time to use it in our app component. Of course, I want to fetch messages right when the app loads. Now I could do this in the constructor, but it is a good practice to not do any heavy lifting or HTTP calls in the constructor. For example, for testing reasons, where it's better to control through Angular 2 if you do it in another place. Now what is this other place? It's the onInit lifecycle hook. Implements onInit is the code I need to add to my class here. And this basically tells Angular 2 and TypeScript that I want to use an interface, the onInit interface, which I do need to import from @AngularCore. And this interface requires me to implement a certain method, the ng-onInit method to be precise. Now this ng-onInit method will get executed automatically, as long as I implement this interface here, by Angular 2 whenever it creates this component. So when I load the app, it creates the component, it will execute this method automatically. And so since I want to load everything up on startup, this is the perfect place to actually fetch the data. So I will do this by using my message service again. And then here I call the getMessages method. And remember, this returns me an observable. So I have to subscribe to it to actually get something and to actually send the request in the first place. And here in the success case, I get back some messages, and I will use those messages to assign them to my local messages property here. So to this messages array. This will then be set equal to the messages I got back from the server. And I will also handle a potential error case by simply logging it to the console for now. Okay, so let's see if this works. I'll first restart my server since I did some or made some changes there too. And then I'll restart my app here by reloading it. Well, we almost got it. We see 3 entries. So we got the 3 objects. That is good. The server-side code seems to work, but somehow we failed to extract the content. Let's see what went wrong. It's a tiny thing. This shouldn't be a let for in loop. It should be a for off loop. So I should loop through all the elements in this array and not try to loop through any keys in some kind of object. So now if I save this, I don't need to restart my server. If I reload this page now, this looks much better. And if I add new random numbers and reload again, they're still there because they're still stored on the server. So I think even though we only have a very basic app here, you're still able to see how easy and fun it is to connect Node.js with Angular 2. Now, of course, there are different ways to connect it. You could also run Angular 2 or serve Angular 2 from a different server. That's just the setup here with which I went. And of course, there are a lot of things how you could extend this app. You could make messages editable or deletable or anything else. You could sort them on the server. There are really quite a lot of possibilities. And again, just a quick note, if you want to dive into this deeper, check out my Udemy course. You'll find a link and possible discounts in the description to this video. And I'm happy to see you in all the other lectures on this channel. Have a great day. Bye.